Welcome to a video presenting sample closing arguments in the case of U.S. versus Sergeant Anderson. In the video vignette on opening statements, you heard both the prosecution and the defense lay out their case theories and themes. In this video, you will see how each attorney weaves into the closing arguments the themes and theories they had introduced during the opening. Counsel are no longer constrained to talk only about what they expect the evidence to show. During closing arguments, the gloves are off. Counsel are allowed to and are expected to forcefully argue how the panel should view the evidence. The emphasis here is on persuasion and not just recitation. Please watch carefully.
Trial counsel, you may present closing argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. Trust. Trust is the weapon that Sergeant Anderson used to victimize Specialist Allison Moreland. He didn't need to use a knife or a gun. All he needed was the trust of a young soldier. And once he had that trust, he used it to take advantage of Specialist Moreland in the worst possible way. At the beginning of this trial, we told you that the evidence and justice would demand a guilty verdict. Now let's talk about the evidence that you've heard over the past few days. You heard from PFC Samantha Parker. Now, she's Specialist Moreland's best friend, who was on the camping trip with her in Rocky Mountain National Park that weekend. PFC Parker told you that she walked in on Sergeant Anderson assaulting her friend, and how she had to pull him off of the victim. She told you Sergeant Anderson was shocked at her arrival, and how he scrambled to pull up his pants. She told you Specialist Moreland appeared shocked and upset, and how she remained mostly quiet and withdrawn for the rest of that night and into the next day. Most importantly, she told you that she ultimately called Specialist Moreland's boyfriend, John Riley, and the military police to report this incident. So now, why did she do that? Because she was concerned about her friend's well-being, because she was trying to help her friend, to take care of her friend, and because she was trying to do what the Army has trained her to do in response to a sexual assault: report the incident and care for the victim. You also heard from Special Agent Olivia Benson, the CID agent who conducted the initial interview with Specialist Moreland. And she described Specialist Moreland's demeanor to you. Specialist Moreland seemed confused and upset about what happened. Special Agent Benson watched her cry during parts of that interview. Special Agent Benson also described the text message conversation between Sergeant Anderson and Specialist Moreland. She told you Specialist Moreland started to get upset and anxious, started fidgeting and even crying, and eventually had to cut off the whole text conversation because she couldn't go on. Just texting the man who had assaulted her was too much. Reading messages that blame her for this violation was terrible for her. Sergeant Anderson texted her that it was just as much on her as it was on him. That it was her fault that Sergeant Anderson groped her while she was sleeping and then penetrated her vagina with his penis while she was frozen in fear. That was on her as much as it was on him? Of course, that was too much for her to bear. Next, Miss Ames, the SANE nurse, told you about the exam that she conducted on Specialist Moreland. Miss Ames told you about how Specialist Moreland described what Sergeant Anderson had done to her, and about the trauma to Specialist Moreland's genital area that she documented. Importantly, though, Ms. Ames also explained why the injuries that she documented are consistent with Specialist Moreland's report and testimony. Specialist Moreland testified that it hurt when Sergeant Anderson forced his penis into her vagina. And Ms. Ames documented the injury that resulted from that assault. This independent medical evidence corroborates Specialist Moreland. Specialist Moreland sat in this courtroom on that witness stand, and she looked you all in the eyes and told you what Sergeant Anderson did to her. How she trusted him, how she considered him a friend, and how she felt safe around him. She was shocked to wake up with her friend on top of her, touching her breasts with his hand between her legs. Specialist Moreland told you how she tried to get him to stop, how she wanted him to stop, and how she felt frozen. She described to you how it felt when he pulled her pajama pants off against her will, how it felt when he yanked her underwear to the side, and then how it hurt when he shoved his penis inside her. She told you how her world stopped turning at that moment because nothing made sense to her anymore. Now, Sergeant Anderson stopped only because he got caught. He stopped because PFC Parker caught him in the act. And after he got kicked out of the tent, Sergeant Anderson zipped up, winked, and walked away. And then after he got kicked out of the tent, Specialist Moreland felt numb. She shut down. And she just wanted to pretend that that whole nightmare didn't exist. Sergeant Anderson's violation of Specialist Allison Moreland's trust was cruel, it was calculated, and it was criminal. The facts are clear. Sergeant Anderson is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and the government respectfully requests that you return a verdict of guilty for all the charges and the specifications.
Defense, you may present argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the panel, this case is about what happens when you get caught going wild in the wilderness. Not everything that happened that night is clear, but what is clear is that Specialist Moreland has a reputation of not telling the truth, that Sergeant Michael Anderson has a reputation for honesty, that what happened that day was consensual, and that we are really here today because of the obliviousness of a drunken friend giving Specialist Moreland a major reason to lie. Right before that weekend began, Specialist Moreland posts on Facebook, "Going camping with a couple hot boys this weekend. Things might get wild in the wilderness." And they did. We also know that meanwhile, as PFC Parker is getting drunk by the campfire, she is becoming angrier and angrier at her boyfriend's infidelity. Angry with men in general. Then, when PFC Parker walks into the tent in a drunken stupor, she sees what she wants to see. A man being a pig. PFC Parker even hears voices, yells of no, except that even Specialist Moreland admits that she never yelled or said no. It didn't happen. PFC Parker heard and saw what she wanted to hear and see. Never mind that the other two witnesses heard sexual moaning, not cries of resistance. What happened after that makes sense in its own twisted way. When PFC Parker sobers up the next day, she badgers Specialist Moreland over and over about it being a rape, about how Specialist Moreland should report this supposed crime. Specialist Moreland refuses and does not confirm Parker's claims. Why? Because there was no rape, and she knows it. Then, after getting drunk again, PFC Parker calls Specialist Moreland's boyfriend and soon-to-be fiancé. And that's why we're here. He had already caught her cheating on him once. Now, Specialist Moreland has to lie about going wild in the wilderness in order to save her relationship, to protect herself. It's a sad story, a very human story, and an all too familiar one. So this case rests solely upon the testimony of Specialist Moreland alone. A true he said, she said. Sergeant Michael Anderson stood right in front of you on that witness stand, looked each of you in the eye, and told you what really happened. And he's been consistent from day one because it's the truth. Remember that when he thought he was texting with Specialist Moreland, when it was really a ruse by CID, he said, "This is on you as much as it is on me," because he knew that she knew the truth. They had sex together, voluntarily. Yes, he was honest and said things got weird. That's because they did. PFC Parker drunkenly walked in on them. It was weird, but not rape. Sergeant Anderson has always been honest and consistent. We know that Specialist Moreland considered Sergeant Michael Anderson attractive and was considering going wild in the wilderness. PFC Parker sees them having sex and in her drunken stupor hears words that were never said and then tattles to Specialist Moreland's boyfriend. Then it spiraled out of control. Having been caught cheating again, Specialist Moreland had one ticket home, one escape route, to do what she's done before, lie. And here we are. To convict Sergeant Michael Anderson of rape, you must find beyond a reasonable doubt that Specialist Moreland is telling the truth. And there's a lot of doubt. And that doubt is reasonable. Members of the panel, you can't convict on these facts. The evidence of guilt just isn't there. Not in a case of he said, she said. But the evidence of innocence is there. The plan to go wild in the wilderness, the confusion of a drunken PFC Parker, and an irate boyfriend. Members of the panel, this is not a case where the evidence of guilt is clear. There will be cases where the alleged victim will clearly be telling the truth and is consistent in her stories. But this is not that case. This case is a simple one of he said, she said, and what you have heard is that she is not truthful. When the prosecutor cannot prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, it is your sworn duty as a panel member to vote for acquittal. This is your duty. Thank you.
Government, rebuttal argument?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense is looking for anything, no matter how irrelevant, to try and confuse the real issue. But the evidence leads to one conclusion. Sergeant Anderson sexually assaulted Specialist Allison Moreland. The defense wants you to ignore the eyewitness to this crime. They need you to believe that because PFC Parker had a few drinks and decided not to drive that night, she couldn't possibly have known what she saw in that tent. But the evidence showed she was capable of seeing Sergeant Anderson's crime and that she made sound decisions that night. PFC Parker admitted that she had a few drinks at the campfire, and she explained that she never drives after drinking. Even after just one drink, she does not drive. PFC Parker told you that she knows that she walked into the tent and she saw Sergeant Anderson assaulting her friend. She knows what she saw. What she saw was so disturbing that she wanted to take her friend home right then, but she made the safe and responsible decision not to drive. Now, even though Specialist Moreland didn't drink that night, PFC Parker realized Specialist Moreland was also in no shape to drive. So what caused that sober soldier to be incapable of driving? Sergeant Anderson. The defense wants you also to believe that in the moments leading up to PFC Parker walking into that tent, she was stewing over her boyfriend's prior infidelity. And what evidence does the defense have to support this claim? 4 tweets from over a month ago. Should we judge her character or credibility based solely off comments that she made in anger a month before the assault? Of course not. Immediately prior to the assault, PFC Parker wasn't wallowing in anger. She was hanging out at the campfire with Specialist Terry Conklin and PFC Zach Dewing. She was hanging out with 2 male friends and having a good time. All 3 of them corroborate this. And yet the defense is asking you to assume that PFC Parker hates men and therefore imagined a rape when none existed. Now, the defense also highlighted the fact that 2 of their witnesses, Sergeant Anderson's buddies, Specialist Conklin and PFC Dewing, both testified that they heard moaning when they approached the tent. Both of these witnesses acknowledged that they are close friends of Sergeant Anderson. Is it really surprising then that they support his story? They weren't in the tent, and they didn't see anything. They don't know what happened. The defense also argued that Specialist Moreland only reported the rape to appease her boyfriend. But you heard from Mr. Riley, and he told you that he knew about the camping trip ahead of time, he saw Specialist Moreland's Facebook page ahead of time, and that Specialist Moreland reported the rape to CID before she told him what happened. The defense theory that Mr. Riley pressured her to report to test whether or not she was lying is fiction. Finally, the defense highlights that you heard from Sergeant Anderson himself. But ask yourselves this: who in this courtroom has more to lose today than Sergeant Anderson? No one. It's his life on the line. But his life is on the line because he violated the trust of Specialist Moreland. Specialist Moreland told you what happened to her. And just like she told CID back when they interviewed her and told Miss Ames when she went to the hospital and endured that invasive exam, her story has been consistent. She has never wavered. And that exam discovered the physical injury that she suffered. Her testimony has been corroborated by other witnesses and evidence time and time again. She is credible and she is reliable. Sergeant Anderson raped Specialist Allison Moreland. The facts make clear beyond a reasonable doubt that Sergeant Anderson is guilty of all the charges and specifications. In light of the evidence, the government again requests that you return a verdict that holds Sergeant Anderson responsible for his actions by finding him guilty. Thank you.
Panel members, the following instructions will guide you during your deliberations.